Hey folks, Dave the Not So Evil Viking 13 here with a bit of Battlefield 1 DLC news that has really, I guess, tickled my immersion. Is that a saying? That shouldn't be a saying. Moving on. What I want to talk about today specifically is a surprise announcement about the upcoming DLC from Gamescom. At Gamescom, DICE and EA announced that not only will the upcoming DLC feature massive battles from the Eastern Front of World War I, but they'll also feature battles from the Russian Revolution and Russian Civil War time period. This is quite a twist for a game that, for the most part, has taken a pretty casual look at World War I history. I like to call Battlefield 1 a riff on history, but it's an announcement that I am quite excited for. Let's take a look at what's to come.
We are losing objective battle.
To really appreciate what's neat about this announcement from DICE, let's take a brief look at the history of the Eastern Front in World War I. At the outset of the war, Russia had a huge amount of troops and of course a massive amount of land as well. In theory, that made them one of the biggest threats in the war, but Austro-Hungary and Germany had far superior military preparations, and almost more importantly, much better infrastructure to support those militaries. The Central Powers were well aware, though, that fighting a much larger enemy like Russia was probably going to be a losing game in the long run, especially if they were having to fight that war on two fronts. So the overall plan of the Central Powers was to try and aim a knockout punch at France in the west and get them out of the war as quickly as possible. This would let them turn their focus to Russia in the east and hopefully be able to defend their eastern borders. On paper, this was a pretty good plan, and the fear of the Central Powers of having to fight a two-front, large-scale war was probably pretty justified. What they weren't expecting was a large amount of success very early on the Eastern Front with Russia. There was an initial burst of patriotism in Russia for the war, but overall, Tsar Nicholas II was not very popular, and the population's enthusiasm for the war waned quite quickly. Eventually, their military's rather extreme failures in the field, which even led some of their generals to commit suicide after the Battle of Tannenberg, for example, quickly sapped civilian morale back home. The Russian military performed so poorly in the field that eventually Tsar Nicholas himself took command of the military operations. Don't get me wrong, the Russians did have some successes, especially early on in the war, there on the Eastern Front. All that really meant, though, is that Germany and Austro-Hungary took them as a much more serious threat and moved some of their best troops and commanders to the Eastern Front, which quickly put an end to some of Russia's best advances. With military successes few and far between, the popularity of the Tsar waned considerably, and eventually, in February of 1917, there was a workers' strike on International Women's Day. The general population at this point was tired of the food shortages, they were tired of the war, and they were tired of the monarchy. When the Tsarist government tried to shut down the protest, the police and soldiers who were sent to do so rather quickly joined the protest. In just a matter of days, it was clear that the reign of Tsar Nicholas II was over, and he was convinced to abdicate his rule. In October, Lenin convinced Bolshevik party leaders that it was time for a second Marxist revolution to seize control of the nation. Within 1 month, they had taken over the provisional government, and Lenin was promising an end to the war, abolishing of all private land ownership, and a system for workers' control over the factories in the nation. What this means for Battlefield 1 is, we finally have an explanation for all of the revolution is coming slogans that we've been hearing for quite a while. Again, 2 of the 6 maps coming in the name of the Tsar DLC for Battlefield 1 are going to feature the Russian Revolution itself. That means you're going to have the White Army, which is the Tsarist loyalist army, fighting against the Communist army, the Red Army. We got a first look at this bloody civil war on the map Tsaritsyn during DICE's stage presentation at Gamescom. Tsaritsyn is a small conquest map, even on the 64-player version with only 3 flags. That makes it a primarily infantry-focused map. There are no planes at all, and each side only gets a single Mark V British-style tank. If the overall city looks familiar, it's because Tsaritsyn is actually Stalingrad, as it would be later known during World War II. Stalingrad is known, of course, for the incredibly costly defense of the city by Soviet forces in World War II against the Germans. Here in World War I, it's very interesting to see that we have the British-style Mark V tanks available for each of the Russian sides of this map. This is because a number of nations got involved in that Russian Civil War. Supporting the Imperial White forces wanting to restore the monarchy were a number of nations, including the UK, the US, Japan, France, and even China. All of these nations, who were of course already heavily involved in World War I, saw the Bolshevik retreat from the war as a betrayal, and they were determined to restore the Tsar to the throne, or, at the very least, get the Bolsheviks out of power. Going back to Battlefield 1, I have been able to spend a number of hours on the Tsaritsyn map and found it to be quite a lot of fun. I think that 64 players is far too many for this map. This is going to be a map you're going to want to have on Conquest 32 or 40. Additionally, there are a lot of elite pickups in the current test version of the map. I do hope that gets toned down by the time that the full DLC releases. With the right amount of players, this map is rather well balanced, and although small and focused on that central B point, because of the amount of cover and trenches available, the battle isn't quite as straightforward as you might think. The center of the map has the illusion of open space, but again, there is a lot of cover around that central point. The central location is a traditional cathedral, which is being fought over by both sides. If you don't recognize it, it's because the Soviets demolished it in the 1930s to make room for more modern constructions. Again, another opportunity for a bit of neat history right here in the middle of a Battlefield 1 multiplayer match. The texture work inside the cathedral is fantastic, with a ton of interesting murals and bits of artwork along the walls. Inside of the Cathedral of Light itself is an interesting split level design. This means that if you take the balcony section, you can go almost halfway around the top and have great firing lanes down on everyone below, but you can't actually capture the flag. However, to capture the flag, you do have to be in that lower central circle. So just because you dive into the middle of the circle and start capping the flag doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get it, especially if the enemy is occupying that balcony level. There's also a ton of trenches outside of the cathedral itself and spreading to both points A and C, allowing for some very intense trench warfare and even some pretty good operating lanes for that new Lancer cavalry. The land ships, while powerful, are going to find this map difficult to operate efficiently in. You're going to want a full crew and hopefully somebody who's there to repair you constantly, because you have to move across all of those trench works across this very small map. Infantry is able to hide and duck in and out of cover quite easily. There's also a couple of side streets full of broken buildings, alleyways, and tight corners on both sides of these broken roads as you head to points A or C outside of the middle of the map that gives infantry a wild amount of cover. If you're in a tank, go ahead and get it out there in the center of the map and be in a position where you can support an attack on a point, but don't expect to always be right there in the middle of the action, at least if you value your life. The second map that's going to feature the Russian Revolution is going to be called Volga River. This map features a massive, ruined battleground with a tank fight between the Soviet Bolsheviks and the Imperial Army. Beyond the fact that this map is going to be much larger than Tsaritsyn, and of course much more open, and vehicles will play a much larger part on it, we don't know a ton about this map just yet. However, I want to send you guys over to a channel called Flakfire. He does some fantastic work on his Battlefield 1 content, and additionally he leans towards the historical aspects of the game, which is right in line with my interest for sure. He's also got a preview of all of the new maps from In the Name of the Tsar, so if you want to see more, go check him out. Again, the channel name is Flakfire, and I'll link him in the description as well. Alright guys, there you have it. That's why I am extra excited for this DLC. The historical aspects just really interest me, and as usual, the maps do look beautiful. I'm still enjoying Battlefield 1, even with the slower DLC launches, and so this additional content drop, even though it's late, is going to be more than enough to keep me interested for months to come. I really think DICE made the right call by taking advantage of the extra time that they were going to be stuck with this DLC to add those couple of extra maps and weapons to make it feel like a larger expansion compared to the Net Pass that we saw much earlier in Battlefield 1's life cycle. Regardless, again, I'm excited. Let me hear what you guys have to say about the DLC, and hopefully I'll see you guys out there playing here shortly. One last thing, I am, again, very excited for this, and I am actually planning a special edition of my Backyard Battlefield Real World Firearms series to go along with the launch. So stay tuned for more news about that. For now, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.